Yeah. All right. I think we can just go ahead and start with questions. Don't really have anything off the top. So.
Over the last 3 days, Alice, the manager in search. How's it going?
I mean, obviously, it's it feels like it starts the second news gets out that you're going to be looking for someone. Get a lot of inquiries, and people have a lot of opinions, and like we discussed last week, it's not like we'd done a lot of advanced work given the circumstances. So the input's actually pretty valuable. Just in terms of the timing, I think there's a good chance we start with internal candidates maybe by the end of this week. We're just kind of finalizing who we're going to have in formal consideration internally. And I would guess we'll start reaching out to teams on permissions for people in other organizations at the beginning of next week.
Can you say anybody internally that you would take a look at? Or?
We're not there yet, but I imagine we'll have at least 1 or 2 internal interviews.
Farhan, correct me if I'm wrong here. You're going into the final year of your contract with the Giants?
That's right.
When you look at your top names on the list, how difficult of a situation is that going to be to navigate? You're trying to convince someone to come and sign a multi-year contract when you and yourself don't have one.
Yeah, as we discussed last week, again, partly the sort of reaction and the amount of incoming calls we've gotten, serves to, support the view that this is a really highly sought after position in an organization that's really well regarded in the game and in the industry. So I don't anticipate any issues there. Some of our candidates may be people that I've had some past relationship with, and maybe that helps provide some reassurance there. But even for people who don't, I mean, you're coming in to be the manager of this team, this organization, and I haven't sensed any concerns from people on that.
Farhan, you said some things last week that made it sound as though you're going to take a hard look at the way you want to do things and maybe go in a different direction. Mm-hmm. Are those the kind of candidates that are you planning to bring in people that we might be surprised that might bring in?
Well, what would surprise you?
Kind of schoolish maybe?
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with 7 managers in my time in baseball, and they all had different styles, and I think 5 of them won Manager of the Year. So, and my relationship with them, I mean, my role's been different in those different organizations, but my relationship's been different with them too. And, at least from my experience, one thing I've learned is that there are no absolutes. There are times when you're going to be working more closely with the manager. There's times when it's more appropriate to be hands-off. And some of that, I think, is the style of the manager and how they like to run the team in the clubhouse. And, some of that is just what the players and the team needs. So, we haven't gotten into, I'm sure there are going to be questions about the roster, but even if we make drastic changes to our roster, 15 or 20 of the players at least are going to be guys that played for us this year. So, to answer your question, there's no template. I've worked with managers who have different experiences and different styles, and I think we want to be as broad as our search as possible.
You've signed players that you've had with other teams. You've hired coaches, managers you've had with other teams. Are you willing to do something beyond that, like go hire a guy who maybe you didn't work with the A's or Dodgers?
Yeah, absolutely. There's only so many of those people. So, yeah, of course. I would anticipate that we interview a number of people that I haven't had that kind of association with. Sorry, go ahead, Maria.
I think Logan mentioned that he would like to be part of these conversations. I guess how much will player feedback kind of factor into the final decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think players have sort of varied levels of interest in it. He's very interested, and I've already had a couple conversations with him. I've had kind of informal conversations with a number of players, their feedback on, the state of the clubhouse and what they think would be good qualities or helpful qualities for this group of players and a new manager. So, I will probably be soliciting Logan's thoughts, and I am expecting some unsolicited thoughts as well. So I think he's very interested and he should be. And we definitely, I value his input for sure.
You've said that you plan to focus on locking down players for the long term. Mm-hmm. What led to that, revelation?
Yeah, I think the way I said it was, we want our focus to be, when we go out, whether it's going into the market or evaluating our own players, want to have an emphasis on continuity, players who are going to be here for a long time. I know there's been some talk of turnover and churn in the roster. I think in a lot of ways we've had an increasing amount of stability over the last 2-3 years. I mean, this year, I know it's been out there, but we've used the fewest number of pitchers at the major league level of any team in baseball. So I think we're really, trying to kind of consolidate, trying to be more consistent with, the players on the team. And stability, I think, just helps people perform at their best. So, whether it's the free agent market, trade acquisitions, or kind of making decisions on players that might be here short term versus even our own, internal, our younger players who have a chance to be here for a while. I think, our inclination is to lean towards stability. Again, if there's somebody who's a great fit on a short-term deal, I don't think we're going to eliminate that. But obviously, we did a lot of that last offseason, and I just see us operating differently this offseason.
What's your openness to a first-time manager?
We are open. I would anticipate that we interview a couple of people who don't have managerial experience. One of the things we talked about last week, which I think will factor into the choice, is we want somebody who can be an effective recruiter. And as we go into free agency, again, I think we, like every organization, we want to sort of build a brand of players wanting to come here and play here, and I think the manager is a big part of that. So, there are guys who don't have managerial experience, but maybe they just ended long playing careers and they have relationships and they can be effective recruiters and be sort of attractive leaders for players. But that's definitely going to factor into it.
How concerned are you about fans' unhappiness, disgruntlement, you and your bosses?
Yeah, I mean, look, the last couple months are as frustrating as things can unfold for a team. To be in a playoff position and just play really poorly the last couple months. So, I think the frustration is completely understandable. That's how it's supposed to feel when you're in a playoff position and you fall out of it and you end poorly. I know this is part of where you're going at, but, just talking about stylistically, platooning, using the opener, things like that. I had a great conversation with somebody in our clubhouse, and I don't want to call them out, but if they later step forward and say that was me, I'm happy for them to take credit for this idea. You're just talking about some of our moves, and this person said, I think it would be helpful for us to be consistent with our brand, right? So, if you're platooning and you're using openers and you're trying to create every advantage that you can, then, the brand is, hey, we want to take every advantage we can at the margins. But, if you're going to do that to be really consistent, you want an on-field product where guys are hitting the cutoff man, where your pitchers are holding runners on, where, you're bunting when it makes sense to bunt, sort of to really have an internally cohesive brand. Because, as far as, pinch hitting goes, when you play a sloppy game and then suddenly in the ninth inning you're bringing 3 guys off the bench, it doesn't really add up. Now, the playoffs are about to start, and I think we will see a lot of these strategies, on the playoff stage, you're going to see guys getting pinch hit for late in the game. You're going to see teams matching up. So I think those things can be part of a winning formula. And I think fans, if they feel like this is part of a winning formula and part of a consistent philosophy or mindset, then, I think the reaction would be different. But when you see sort of this gap between, us maybe very aggressive managerial moves and how we use the roster, but you're not seeing, the level of, you're not seeing kind of clean, crisp baseball on the field day in, day out. And again, I understand that the argument is made that, well, maybe some of that is causing what we see on the field. I think that's fair. I don't really have an answer for that other than, for us to, be internally consistent with that notion of us trying to get every little advantage we can, whether it's, strategy in terms of in-game moves or, how we coach our players and how they execute on the field.
How much will your offseason be impacted by some decisions that players have to make, Conforto and I in particular?
I mean, certainly some. Right now we're sort of operating like we will have all those players back. And if they, choose to exercise their right to opt out, then, we'll be looking to fill those spots.
Earlier this summer on the show podcast, you mentioned that you never expected Aaron Judge to sign here last offseason. At what point did you start to really feel that that was going to be the case? And going into this really important offseason for you, how confident are you that you'll be able to sign free agents that you intend to target?
Yeah, look, going back that one, it's getting further and further away, and it's kind of hard to remember everything that's been said, although there's been a lot of it. I viewed that one as really an uphill battle. I mean, you're talking about one of the greatest players of this generation, and we know the pull for players at that level of playing in one organization over the course of their entire careers. And so I think that's where we viewed it as a challenge, despite the geography and despite the fact that I think he did have some genuine interest in playing here. Again, this is kind of tough territory because I don't want to be speaking for him at all. And, he's not answering questions about the Giants. So, again, I think for us, the main focus for us as we go into free agency is being able to sell our situation, our baseball situation, as much as anything. I mean, top free agents want to be in environments where they think the team's going to be successful. They're a big part of that, but they also want to feel like whether it's the current roster, whether it's the farm system, there's going to be help, especially when you're talking about guys who have a chance to be here for a long time. So, one of the real positives of this season was how many young players came up and I think are going to be a big part of this team and organization going forward. So I think that's going to be a key part of our pitch is, we had a really good group of rookies. We have more guys coming from the system who are going to help us in the next couple of years. And that's why we think we have a chance to sort of build the foundation of a sustainable contender.
You said that you did research, or your team did research on free agents, and you found that players aren't really that happy coming into town for a 3-game series. You later added that you think the city maybe is a little bit of a polarizing place among players in terms of the desire to play here. How do you navigate through that through another all-season? How do you sell players on the city when you're quoted by saying that about this city?
I mean, can you say exactly what I said? I mean, you're paraphrasing. I don't think that's accurate at all.
No, I know you don't. You also said, I don't know if we would say San Francisco is an idiosyncratic market, but I do think maybe it is more that way than it was 20 years ago. So it gave the impression to a lot of fans that maybe the city is not helping attract players here as well as the brand and the baseball you're playing.
Yeah. As far as the geography, I'd say the same thing I said with the manager. This is, a great storied organization. This is, in my opinion, the best ballpark in Major League Baseball. I think everybody loves playing here. When I talked about, the idiosyncratic nature of it, some of it is as simple as, how cold it is when we play our games. There are players that don't like playing in colder, in colder evenings. There are players who are, born and raised on the East Coast, and that's their strong preference to sign with an East Coast team. There are players born and raised on the West Coast, and that's their preference. So, I still think at the end of the day, it's about, especially when you're talking about guys who are looking to sign somewhere long-term, it's the overall baseball situation, their confidence in the organization. And I think that carries the day. But honestly, every team, I think, deals with the market and recognizing that there are players for whom that isn't the ideal landing spot.
Talking about the opener role, do you kind of regret not being able to get some starting pitching at the deadline for this team to help for its playoff push?
I wouldn't say that. I think one question that we're going to be asking, and I know it's been brought up a few times, is for players that were in that role where they were kind of pitching behind openers. I know the question's been asked about Sean Manaea. He finished the year really well, and the question is, should we have kind of moved him back into the rotation sooner? I don't really have the answer to that. I think when you look at our record in games where we started an opener, where we started Scott Alexander or Brebbie or Ryan Walker, our record was still pretty good in those games. So, and a number of those players, I think probably including Sean and Alex would be in that category as well. They performed better, in games they were quote unquote relievers rather than starters. So, again, I think it gets back to players being in roles they're comfortable with, and I think the new manager is going to have a lot of say in how we manage that, how we manage the position player side of things. And that's where I think we're not really looking for a manager who is bound to certain strategies one way or another. So I think that's going to have a lot of influence in how things play out next year.
Farhan, the perception is out there that you have a process that you really, really believe in. And, sort of referencing what Ann said earlier, now you're more, or you've stated that you need to be more open to change. How comfortable are you potentially doing things a different way?
I mean, very comfortable, as long as it works, right? I mean, we want a good team. We want a team that the fans are excited about. We want a team that's in the playoffs. And, I think when you look at, teams that are in the playoffs, there are teams that don't platoon or pinch hit hardly at all. There are teams that do it a lot. When you look at pitching staffs, I think there are kind of different strategies that the playoff teams have partaken as far as that goes. So, I think I may have said this last week, but I don't really view us as pro-opener. We're just not anti-opener, and we think if it makes sense, as a lot of teams do, that, hey, this is the best way for us to win today, then, there's no kind of bias against doing that. Now, we wound up using an opener, those three guys I mentioned, something like 32 times this year. Is that too many? Does that create, a lack of stability for the roster? Again, our pitching staff overall was pretty good. I think we were third in the NL in ERA, and we had kind of the fewest walks in the big leagues, which is a big part of our philosophy. But could it be better? Could we have gotten more from somebody like Sean if he had gone back in the rotation earlier? I think we have to look at all that stuff and talk to players, talk to coaches, really review all that internally. And again, when particularly on the opener, we went into this season, I think, almost overstocked on starting pitching, and we had 6 guys that we thought could start the season in our opening day rotation, and then we had some young guys that we figured would be up there too. So it wasn't really by design that we wound up using the opener as often as we did. We sort of did it because we thought it was the best way to win games in the middle of the season when some guys were struggling. So, but that's a long way of, that's a long answer, and the straightforward answer to your question is yes, I'm comfortable, because we just want to build the best team, and if we're kind of convinced that certain strategies will bring out the best in players and help us win more games, then absolutely.
You've been aggressive early in off seasons with veteran starting pitchers. I'm just trying to fill your rotation. Is it going to be different this year, just given Harrison and Wynn back and some of those guys finishing the year in your rotation?
Yeah, I don't imagine us being, looking to add starting pitching depth. It's a little bit like what we talked about at the trade deadline, where we were looking for, top of the rotation help. And if that wasn't available, then we felt like, we had sort of answers internally that were maybe similar to what was out there. So I would imagine same approach in free agency.
Why aren't you looking for starting pitching depth?
Well, when we look at what we have between, Logan Webb, Alex Cobb, the young guys who, pitched the last 3 games of the season for us, we're going to have Anthony DeSclafani coming back. We'll see what happens with Stripling and Manaea. We just think we have a good amount of that depth. And again, anytime you have a chance to add top of the rotation options, you'll look at it. But, for guys that are sort of more back of the rotation options, we just don't view that as a need.
Farhan, Giants set a single season record in strikeouts. Now, in June, when the Giants were playing the best ball of the year, they were playing station to station, getting the big hits, moving guys over, getting guys on, moving them over, getting them in. Do you think perhaps there will be more of a move towards that strategy going forward?
Yeah, contact is, we value contact. Certainly as we look at our minor leaguers and guys coming up through the system, that's one of the key traits we look at in hitters to kind of get promoted and work their way up to the big leagues is guys that make contact, guys that don't chase. I think some of what we saw in terms of the strikeout numbers was the number of young players we had. It's just tough to sort of make the transition from even AAA to the big leagues, even if you get out to a good start and just maintain it. So I think you're going to see ups and downs with rookies kind of more than with veteran players. And I think we did see a lot of that. But that's another characteristic of playoff teams. If you look at the teams in the playoffs, they have some of the lowest strikeout rates of any teams in baseball. And a lot of that is even teams that get a lot of production and hit for power. So that's definitely going to be important for us.
What's the process going to be like? Can you share are you going to be the initial interviewer? Are you going to have a small team of people who vet your candidates?
Yeah. We're having a lot of internal conversations. I'm talking to the board as we start putting our list together. I'm talking to our players. I'm talking to people in our baseball operations department. And then once we start getting down the road usually you do a couple of in-person rounds, and I would imagine certainly in the final round, once we get to a smaller group of candidates, that'll involve them meeting, not just myself and baseball people at the ownership level. Greg, Buster, Larry. Larry met all the final round candidates last time around, and so subject to their availability, I think that's going to be a really important sort of betting point for us.
Farhan, going back to last week, I think that a lot of fans that we talked to have certainly looked at this as like you hired Gabe, you guys had your process, and obviously everyone has their own sort of individual thought, but that was kind of a team thing. And they still have the question with, you guys have talked about accountability across the board. Why did this land on him?
Yeah. Look, I don't mean to sort of avoid the question, but this is sort of the dynamic that happens anytime a team moves on from a manager or a head coach. They bear a disproportionate level of the responsibility. In our case, it's my responsibility to the fans, to ownership, to the organization to decide, if a change would be in the best interest and give us the best chance to succeed going forward. And that was my view, and that's why I made that recommendation.
What areas on the roster do you expect to prioritize upgrading this offseason?
I think some of these quotes will be compared to what I said last year because they're going to sound pretty similar. But one of the big things is just going to be to go into next year with as good of a defensive club as we can have. We had a significant issue with our outfield defense last year. It was improved this year, but it still wasn't where we wanted it to be. I just think being more athletic, having more range in the outfield. We talked about our pitching staff, for the second time in 3 years, having the lowest walk rate in baseball. And, to really get the best out of that, if your pitchers are, forcing the action on the opposition, when they get guys to put balls in play, you want to be able to convert them to outs. And, that's where, for us, seeing some of these young guys come up, seeing Luciano come up and making a pretty positive impression at short, Tyler Fitzgerald, the way he played center field, he might be the best defensive center fielder in the organization. So some of those solutions might come internally, might come from just giving younger guys more of an opportunity to play, working through their offensive struggles, because we know we're going to get that defense from
What
us.
about the offense? So, I mean, the defense wasn't good, but the offense wasn't good either.
Yeah, the offense is a little bit of a tougher one because, as we've talked about, when we started August, we're 10, 12 games over 500. July was a bad month for us offensively, but for the first half of the season, we actually had a good offense. At the start of the season, we felt like we had 6, 7 guys who could have 20 plus homers, and we wound up with, one guy with 20 plus and a bunch of guys in the 15 to 18 range. So yeah, I mean, look, we're gonna want to improve the club in every facet, and we talked about the strikeout rate. Our offense, I think, when you look at the final analysis, was a little bit below average. But for us, the point of leverage is we look to get more athletic, get younger. If you're asking, do we want to improve the offense or the defense? Obviously, the answer is both. But a real point of emphasis for us is just going to be to get more athletic, just cover more ground defensively.
Will you have the payroll? I mean, fans kind of knock the organization for a lot of reasons, including the payroll. And you said, I don't want to spend just to spend. And you spent quite a bit last year, even though you missed out on the 2 big guys, top 7 or whatever it was, top 5. But what about increasing the payroll to go after, instead of just one marquee guy, a lot of them to be a top 5 payroll like this organization was in the past?
Yeah, again, I don't know there's a target for where we rank payroll-wise, but it's sort of my responsibility to make the case if there are moves that, for baseball reasons, make sense and take the payroll up. So that's really my responsibility to make those recommendations. Nobody's said there's a cap. Nobody said there's a limit. That's on me. If there are players out there that would push us past where we've been the last few years and we think it makes sense, then that's my job to convince ownership that it makes sense.
You were hired in November of 2018. This is October of 2023. So big picture, frequently you go to a job interview, they say, where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
Yeah.
So November 18 Farhan to November 2023 Farhan, where do you see this organization in that 5-year run? Are you where you wanted to be 5 years ago?
Yeah, if you asked me where I'd want to be this year, it would have been to make the playoffs, and that's what made the last 2 months difficult. But when I look at the overall organization, look at the farm system, from being a probably bottom 3 to 5 farm system back then when you were talking about Murph, to where we are now, which is, I think, definitely top half, a team that, ranked in the top 2 or 3 in terms of rookie playing time and production. I think we're going into this offseason, in my time here with, as many young players who we think have a chance to be big contributors in the following season as in any other season. I was talking to Pat Burrell on my way here, who does a lot of work in our minor leagues, and you probably know this. He's really excited about what we have in the farm system, and even some of the guys that we saw up at the big league level this year that maybe a lot of these guys, in my opinion, are going to be good major league players. It's a question of when and where. Is it going to be with the 2024 Giants? Is it going to be with the 2025 Giants? Is it going to be with some other organization down the road? And now it's sort of our responsibility to make sure they're good players here next year. So I think in terms of the development, the number of young players we have, that group of players, there's a lot to feel good about. Again, results-wise, we're sitting here with the playoffs starting, talking about the end of our season, finishing under 500, that's a disappointment. That's not where we wanted to be. So, talked about that. I don't, our goal is to never have these kinds of press conferences. We should be in the playoffs every year. And so as far as that goes, we're not where I wanted to be, where we wanted to be. But in terms of progress in the organization, our young players, I think, if you sort of look at it objectively and the group of players that we've worked through that have a chance to help us going forward, there is a lot to be excited about.
With the understanding that the playoffs are still going on and the interview process will take time, do you have a target point by which you'd like to have a new manager in place?
Yeah, we talked about the start of free agency, so after the World Series. And I mean, again, it's possible that there's a candidate with a World Series team, and that might make it a little tougher, but that's really our goal over the next month.
How do you balance knowing the position player mix has to change to some extent, and you need more athleticism? You also have 3 people I'm thinking of in particular who are going to be tender decisions, arbitration decisions: J.D. Davis, Mike Yastrzemski, Austin Slater. All 3 players still have value.
Yeah.
How do you balance knowing that you can't just run the same group back with, also recognizing the value that those players still have?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are teams that are not in the playoffs that had disappointing seasons that have those superstar players, and the refrain you hear is, we didn't have the right players around them. We didn't have the right complementary players. So yeah, not every acquisition we make or not every retention decision we make is going to be, around a star, even though I understand a lot of the conversation is going to be about that. So as far as those tender decisions, I think a lot of what's going to make this, as I mentioned to Ann, we're going to have, even with a lot of turnover, 15, 20 of the same players next year. We have to make sure we get the most out of them. And as we get into free agency and recruit players, we have to convince them we have the right players around them. So, I think a lot of the players we have are part of the solution, are part of a playoff team. And, we're just going to have to balance that against the changes that we're thinking about needing to make.
The outlook at shortstop now that Brandon Crawford's a free agent?
Yeah, as we sit here now, we want to give Marco Luciano the chance to be the everyday guy next year. So, if anything, his call-up was slowed down by the injury he had this year. His time at the big leagues, we would have liked to see him up here a little bit more, but, he's worked his way up, earned this opportunity, and we're really excited about what we saw the last couple of weeks.
With the farm in better shape, would you say there is more openness this offseason to use some of those assets in a trade to bring in more established players?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even at the deadline this year, we were very open to trading just about anybody, and I imagine we'll have the same outlook this offseason.
Farhan, do you anticipate maybe getting back into contract talks for an extension at some point before spring training? Would you like to have that done? What is the status with that?
Yeah, right now my focus is obviously the managerial search, getting ready for free agency, and so that's not really been a topic of conversation. Obviously, working very closely with ownership on this hire, on the plan for the offseason. As I said on Thursday or Friday, have their support. I don't view that support as an endorsement necessarily, because I don't think any of us are happy with where we are. So that's just not something that's on my mind right now, and that's not our focus as an organization.
We got a note on Slater that he's going to see Dr. Meister and then have a surgery potentially next week. What's the timetable for him, and will Dr. Kazuki do that one, or is it to be determined?
Yeah, I'm not sure who's going to do the surgery, but the plan will be for him to be ready by opening day. We may have to be careful with his workload in spring training, but he should be ready by opening day.
One of the big stories this year, the farm, the guys who were called up. Who do you expect we could see next year in terms of guys being called up and making their debuts? What do you think of? What should we expect in terms of guys like Casey Schmidt, Fitzgerald, Matos, and others who make their debuts this year?
Yeah, in terms of the next wave, a lot of it is on the pitching side, which kind of goes to the question Don asked about pitching depth. Mason Black, Carson Wisenhunt, Hayden Birdsong, Landon Arup. I think we have a really good group of starting pitchers that we're going to see next year, who have a chance to make a big impact on the pitching staff and the rotation in particular. Sorry, what was the second question again?
The guys who came up this year, Schmidt, Matos, Harrison, etc., what should we expect from them going forward, and any plans for next season?
Yeah, again, guys like Schmidt and Matos, they have a chance to be internal solutions for what we're talking about, getting more athletic, getting better defensively, and it's just going to be about consistency with the quality of their at-bats, which we saw for stretches from both of those guys, and that goes for Luciano and Fitzgerald as well. These guys all have chances to be, part of a position player group that's really good defensively, that's here for the long term, and it's just going to be about whether we're getting enough from them offensively. So that's going to be the challenge.
A question about just, there's so many data points that you can use to measure success or failure, win-loss record being the most obvious. For you, historically, or maybe even now, is attendance a data point that's important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, I think you look at the number of confounds that we're dealing with as an organization, a lot of what's happened over the last 10 or 20 years, but people vote with their feet, right? And as a baseball group, I think it's our responsibility to put a compelling product on the field. And we've talked a lot about how, if you win, that usually drives attendance. And, I still think that's true. So, from where we were in August, if we had played better, if we, had a chance to clinch the playoffs during this last homestand, would the attendance, would the energy have been different in the ballpark? I think almost certainly so. So, I continue to think that's our primary responsibility, just win games, because that's what fans want. That's what's going to attract fans to the team.
You had spoken about the conversation with the player about the brand. You said if our brand is going to be winning at the margins and all that. So Matt, this kind of blends some of the questions that were asked earlier.
Yeah.
Is that your brand, or is that brand in flux going into the future?
Yeah. So I'm a big avid TV watcher. I don't know if you knew that. Some of the people who've been here for a while have known that about me. So, one of the shows I've been watching kind of therapeutically over the last couple months is The Bear. I don't know how many people here watch that show. And there's an episode in the second season about one of the characters in the show who goes and works as a stage at this 3-star Michelin restaurant. Do you watch the show? Okay, right. Not that one. I'm talking about when he goes to work at the restaurant, the episode Forks. Yeah. So anyway, I promise I'm going somewhere with this.
Everyone watched The Bear, though. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's an amazing show. So anyway, this guy's a little annoyed at the fact he works as a stage. The first week, all he's doing is cleaning forks, and then the next week he's cleaning spoons, and it's like really mundane. But the episode really revolves around the story and narrative behind a sign that's up in the restaurant kitchen that says every second counts. And it's just sort of, when I was watching that, I really identified with it, because to be part of excellence anywhere, it just, no detail can be too small. And for us, I think, that's what we want our brand to be, that every second counts, every detail matters, whether it's holding runners on, whether it's bunting at the right time, whether it's hitting the cutoff man, whether it's, pinch hitting in the right spot to get a matchup that helps you win the game, whether it's a pitching move that, might help you win the game. All of that stuff kind of works together. So, so that's kind of what, I think as we've had conversations over the last few days, that's what we want our brand to be. We don't want to be a team that plays sloppy baseball and then pinch hits in the 9th inning and people are wondering, why are you even bothering? We want it all to work together.
So you're saying Kirby will be a managerial candidate?
Yeah, maybe. Well,
Baseball is just a quick counter for conversational purposes.
Yeah.
Is that sometimes micromanaging every second, while it seems efficient and valuable, sort of runs counter to the narrative of baseball's 150 years, that it's a long sport and guys are going to go through ups and downs and slumps, and you got to ride with your guys. You know what I mean? So is there a little bit of a button heads with every second counts versus the rhythm of baseball?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it's inconsistent, because part of the detail and understanding the detail is when to not make a move, right? When to kind of stick with your guy. But that comes from sort of a complete level of preparation and understanding of who your guys are, what they need. And so I actually don't think it's inconsistent. And again, I would just, I think we need to look at everything. Our next manager is going to be, largely, if not entirely, influential on how things are managed. But, I don't want to, I'm not saying, we're going to be anti-platoon or anti-opener. I mean, I said it before, it's just everything in kind of the right amount, everything that helps us win games. And if, our manager thinks, well, I understand that on paper this move makes sense, but I think, leaving this guy in is best for us in the long run, I completely respect that, because, that's something that's sort of hard for any of us to know, and nobody's going to understand that better than the manager, who has kind of the heartbeat of the team. So.
And just talking about the branding and with the attendance, I feel like a lot of the frustration that fans are having is that they're not really relating, or they're not really enjoying just the overall brand and the philosophy and the strategy of baseball being played. Last offseason, Larry Bear said that, I think we're finding that it takes some explaining because it's not in the headlines. I think the explanation is going well with the fans. We're getting reactions. Fans are like, okay, we get it, we understand now. And they start seeing guys like Stripling, Minaya, Conforto. Okay, I get it. You did a lot of moves that added up. The light bulb went on, but the light bulb didn't go on immediately. Is that kind of fair to kind of ask fans to have this sort of, they need this explanation, need to have this light bulb go on to understand the philosophy for winning baseball games?
Well, I think what Larry was referring to was some of the offseason moves, where it started, we obviously tried to sign a couple of guys at the higher end of the market, didn't work out, and we wound up signing several free agents. And look, we were a 500 team last year. We thought these guys were going to help us get to the next level, and it didn't happen. So I don't think his comments were specifically around strategy. But again, I think for us, it's sort of finding the middle between sort of selling and marketing what we're doing. And, so I do think this is not like an education, it's more having the dialogue and creating understanding and buy-in. I actually think that's an important part of any team is, hey, this is our plan, whether it's with players, whether it's with the strategy, and getting engagement from fans on that. But then again, it's also, we can't be out there dictating this is how baseball should be played. I don't think we've done that, but I think understanding what's going to resonate. And every situation is different, every fan base is different, and some things that, even though I've said a number of times, look, some of these playoff teams are going to be, engaged in these strategies pretty heavily over the next few weeks. But every fan base is different, and every fan base's preferences and expectations are different. So that's got to be part of the picture as well.
You went from Farhan to the.
I'll just take this one last one.
You went after the top free agent last winter. Is there any reason you wouldn't go after the top?
Everybody owes John a drink for finding the smartest way to ask that question. Yeah, I can't comment on free agents quite yet. So, that's my boring answer. Sorry.
How about Crawford? Are you going to speak with him? I mean, could he evolve into a backup 3 times a week, third baseman, shortstop, second baseman, or are you cutting the cord? Are you severing ties?
No, I wouldn't say that. But again, it's a challenging fit. I mean, we view Marco as our shortstop next year. I know that's been Craw's position. I don't want to speak for him, or I don't know that it's appropriate to say anything beyond that publicly. But I know he hasn't decided himself what he wants to do. So I think that's kind of the big takeaway right now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.